Homer vs. Dignity contains one of the most infamous scenes in Simpsons history. Just mention the word panda and The Simpsons, and you'll hear the echoes of groans of countless Simpsons fans. It's one of those moments held up as a symbol of how far the show had fallen since the classic era. If I didn't know better, it was like there was some billionaire paying the writers to strip the whole series of its dignity. And it's not just the panda scene that makes Homer vs. Dignity so hated. This is an episode that asks the audience to watch our Homer repeatedly degrade himself, constantly playing mean-spirited and uncomfortable pranks, just so Mr. Burns can get his jollies. And they don't even allow Homer to turn the tables on his sadistic boss in the end. It's like watching a 22-minute-long humiliation ritual. So, are these critics correct? Is Homer vs. Dignity truly the worst episode ever? Or is this a case of the merely mediocre getting dragged down by an infamous moment? Let's dig deeper to find out. I think it's important that we start out this analysis by airing my most petty grievance, and it's probably not what you'd expect. The most annoying thing about Homer vs. Dignity is that the first half is actually pretty good. I'm serious. Go watch the first 11 minutes of this thing. There's really not that much to rustle the jimmies of longtime Simpsons fans. We like to complain that the Simpsons eventually became a upper middle class family that threw money around like it's nothing, but here we have a very down-to-earth premise about a family not making ends meet. In fact, it subverts our expectations at first, seemingly one of those where they're splashing around on fancy dinners for mediocre Bart achievements, but then it hits us with the hard reality that they're broke, with them trying to dine and dash and getting stuck singing as a mariachi band. Their budget issues are treated very matter-of-factly. This has quietly been going on for some time. You could even argue that this is commentary for the recent season's spending habits, that here is where the invoice gets paid. The Simpsons could never afford to live this lavishly. We get this excellent scene with Lindsay Naegle, their financial panther. Everything about this is great. Chief Wiggum's retiree discussion, Lindsay showing this graphic of them over time, her straight-to-the-point analysis, and not having any real solutions. Lindsay and Homer have so much entertaining banter, with her witty insults and Homer's ridiculous strategies of pretending to be a deaf mute and abruptly throwing cards in her face. It's a nice spin on Simpsons' typical money woes, commenting on the burgeoning industry of financial planning. In older episodes, we get the Marge and her calculator scene instead. Then they set up the Mr. Burns angle by getting Smithers out of the way with his Malibu Stacy musical. Unlike in Homer the Smithers, where Burns needs to be taken care of, here he is portrayed as being aimless and bored. Without Smithers, he's roaming the hallways looking for something that would interest him. He literally describes himself as a bored and joyless old man. It's certainly not the most subtle writing in terms of establishing motives today, but I buy this characterization. Smithers serves as a target for Burns' aggression, as well as a steadying hand for his destructive impulses. But with him out of the way, he is free to wallow in his own crapulence. As a core premise, this prank monkey concept makes a lot of sense. Of course the Simpson family would need money, and this is a service someone as mean-spirited as Mr. Burns would pay for. And we all know that Homer has little shame. The biggest issue with the first half is that it feels awfully derivative of past Simpsons classics. As mentioned earlier, financial issues are such a common inciting incident, and Homer going to Burns for a raise reminds me a lot of this moment from Dog of Death. It borrows some elements from Homer the Smithers, and this opening restaurant is extremely typical of this era. They redo the "there's a New Mexico" bit as another example. Even this awesome joke feels like it's reheating Last Exit to Springfield's nachos. I guess if you're gonna redo jokes, you may as well borrow from the best. The first half is solid, all things considered. Honestly, if we were gonna rank the top 10 episodes of Season 12 only based on its first half, Homer vs. Dignity would make the list. But that's the rub. That's why this episode is so annoying. Because it legitimately had potential as a concept, and it makes a good first impression. It's not like Saddlesore Galactica, that similarly falls apart in its second half. That episode, while not awful right out the gate, still had that air of, this Bart plot is kind of bullshit to it. I think most people watching Homer vs. Dignity wouldn't have an inkling why this thing is so hated for quite some time. The other tricky thing is that if this truly has a claim for being the worst episode ever, then the second half has to be really, really, really bad. I'm serious. We're talking amongst the worst ever here. It has to completely invalidate any previous goodwill built up. That's a tall order. There are two big dangers of this prank monkey concept. One, it runs the danger of being too sadistic, where Homer and Burns do too many cruel pranks on innocent bystanders. It could create a likability problem, where we don't care if Homer changes his ways. Or two, it runs the danger of being too masochistic, where Homer willingly debases himself so much that we don't enjoy watching it. Audiences typically hate seeing their favorite characters repeatedly humiliated. Unfortunately, danger is Homer vs. Dignity's middle name, and it goes barreling into both obstacles at full speed. If only there was a term for both of these at the same time. Things start out well with the prank monkey storyline, with Lenny and Comic Book Guy. Neither of these actions are particularly nice, but they're small and pointless enough. Lenny's a character that has always taken a punch well, and it adds to his running gag. This is the peak of the whole episode in my book. Everything about the pudding sequence is hilarious. As for Comic Book Guy, well, he has never been a particularly sympathetic character. Nobody likes seeing a piece of comic book history destroyed, but at the end of the day, it's just stuff. There are more copies of this comic in the Simpsons world. It serves as a decent enough escalation. And importantly, it builds up the Homer-Burns dynamic, where we get our first glimpse of Homer degrading himself for money. It's clear Burns doesn't give a crap about Homer as a person, and it makes the audience root for his downfall even more. There are at least building blocks of a functional character arc here. I think the big turning point of Homer vs. Dignity is the stadium scene, with Baby Made a Boom Boom. This prank is just uncomfortable. Burns' idea, I guess, is just to embarrass Homer and the guys who walk in here with this giant baby requesting a diaper change. I'll grant them that the wealthy dowager fainting is pretty funny. However, unlike this past Mr. Plow joke, where it pokes fun at Barney for working this awful, idiotic job, this one just feels like Mr. Burns' weird humiliation kink. There's nothing else to it than the shock factor. There's not even character commentary like the earlier Comic Book Guy scene. The plot, by its nature, has to keep escalating things and show how low Homer can go. But it's not especially fun to sit through. Then we have the infamous panda scene, which I have no idea how to discuss on modern day YouTube without getting utterly destroyed by the automated censors. I guess we're calling it a panda assault today. Anyway, clearly, from a plotting perspective, the only way the prank monkey storyline can hit its climax is by having a bull panda have its way with Homer. Don't worry, it all happens off screen, and he's in a large padded suit. The implications of this are not horrifying at all. Sure, Lisa just watched her father get dragged away to get assaulted by a large mammal, but this still might not be in the top 5 horrible things her therapist will hear about. We can copy-paste some of the diaper scene to this one. They're just going for shock value. The goal is clearly to find Homer's lowest point to crawl back from, and this is what they went with. I'm not as interested in the debate over what is bad taste or what can or cannot be joked about. This isn't my personal taste, but you all know by now that I'm a schmaltzy cornball. Animated series can often get away with stretching the limits of bad taste, so this line is going to be different for everyone. The fact that it all happens off screen leaves much of it to our imagination. I would assume, being in that padded suit, there is a limit to what actually happened to Homer. But even that argument is kind of a cope and a rationalization, as it's clear what they're going for here. My main argument is that it's cheap and lazy, and that there's nothing clever about it. Any 13-year-old can write pointless, edgy schlock. There's not much commentary here about our culture, other than some zoo satire. When Moe says, "You ain't going nowhere, cutie," it's the show winking to the audience about Homer's situation. Maybe the funniest thing about the premise is that the writers picked pandas for this joke, which were notorious for being unwilling to mate in captivity. Wait a minute, Did Burns secretly supply panda pheromones? Anyway, in my old 60-second Simpsons review, I did go on record of finding this scene funny in a meta sense. That this is the writers swinging their dicks around saying, "This is our show and we'll do whatever we want." It's funny in a sheer audacity way, that I can't believe they would go for this. But let me be clear, any love I have for the panda is ironic. It has reached that special circle of so bad it's good. We have gone from wide load being risen on Homer's butt, to a bee bit my bottom, to Homer getting humped off screen by a panda. Great job, fellas. Obviously, you have to have something here to reach the low point, and The Simpsons went with diaper changes and a panda assault. I think, however you filled in those blanks, you'd get an unfun Act 2. It's just clear that the writers were over-aggressive in constructing this plot point. They do have some good instincts, particularly in using Lisa to force Homer to confront what he has become. If you need a character to turn over a new leaf, Lisa is a good vehicle for this. I like their decision to have Homer put his words into action by donating the money to needy children. Homer's turnaround happens fairly quickly, but given his extremely traumatic experience, it makes sense. Homer has completely changed, and the only thing left to do is to validate it with a final test. Easy as cake, right? I've also gone on record declaring the ending of Homer vs. Dignity to be total bullshit, and that it is actually the worst part of the episode. Or at least it's the most incompetent. Say what you want about the panda, but at least I get what they're going for. It's extreme and stupid, but I understand what this part of the story is trying to achieve. The Fish Guts ending is the writers getting way too cute, being so obsessed with subverting our expectations that they constructed an ending that means exactly nothing. Here's the problem with the setup. You have to let Homer reject Mr. Burns' $1 million offer. It's mandatory. However, once you introduce the fish guts to the story as a comedic device, you have to throw the fish guts. How weird would it be for Burns to threaten fish guts and then nothing happens? The fish guts have to be thrown and chaos must rain down onto Springfield. Both pieces of the Homer versus Dignity equation feels right, given the setup. However, you cannot have Homer idiotically walk away from Mr. Burns and leave him behind to throw them. They're all like, "Wow, Dad, you sure have validated your character arc," while Mr. Burns continues stripping the rest of the town of their dignity. Homer's growth means absolutely nothing, because pranks aren't done in a vacuum. What about what happened to these guys? What about Comic Book Guy? What about poor, defenseless Lenny? Did you think about Lenny? You can't resolve half of the issue and call it a day. Homer started the snowball of Mr. Burns' prank obsession, so his hands aren't clean yet. There's a maniac running wild. You essentially have two options for the culmination here. Either Mr. Burns gets his final comeuppance, or you go for the darker ending where he gets away with it. I actually agree with their instinct that simply punishing or humiliating Mr. Burns is too obvious. It would be too straightforward and sitcom-y to have Burns wallowing in fish guts while everyone laughs at him. That's the kids' show ending. We need some kind of Simpsons spin. You could do something like Homer secretly swapping out the fish guts for the money and throwing the $1 million into the crowd or whatever, thereby thwarting Burns. And he accidentally causes a chaotic mob to form to collect the money. You could have Homer flatly refuse Mr. Burns and actively block him from taking over as Santa. Then Burns' only option would be to throw them himself from the pirate ship, showing the whole town what a cretin he really is. It would prove to everyone he truly has no dignity as a man. He can no longer hide behind Homer. Or you could have Burns go to the owner of a neighboring float, let's say Moe, and pay him to throw them instead. Maybe Moe does it for only 10 grand. Then you get a darker and more cynical ending that provides more direct commentary. That you personally can heal your soul and regain your sense of dignity. You can even try to stop them. But these rich dudes will inevitably find someone else with fewer scruples. None of these tweaks are that ideal, and would functionally be similar to what actually happens, but the main thing is that this ending requires a big showdown between Homer and Burns. He has to prove that he has changed as a character by no longer enabling Burns. He must take an active stance to complete his arc. You don't have to go the jingle all the way route and literally have a parade float battle, but as is, him simply walking away is weaselly garbage. I don't hate everything about this ending. Like, it's got that adorable Marge moment with Funky Winkerbean. And this kid taking Lisa's friendly pat poorly is hilarious in a WTF way. Oh, so now the episode cares about consent, huh? But with all the schlocky parade announcement dialogue, it's not exactly showing instead of telling. Like, Lisa provides maybe her most idiotic line in series history with Pranksgiving, uh-oh. Then she turns to the camera and says, I have a ball. Perhaps you'd like to bounce it. The conclusion that I come to is that Homer vs. Dignity was written during the worst possible era for this concept. There is something compelling about exploring the nature of dignity, to see what Homer's actual standards are. We've seen Homer do so many terrible things over the years, and be so easily tempted. Homer has always been the Simpson family member with the least amount of shame. However, the writers greatly underestimated the severity of this kind of plot. It's a very transgressive concept that can easily alienate the audience, so they have to be extremely careful about the pranks chosen. This is the kind of story where a lighter and more breezy touch is needed, where maybe the audience can get the point via a silly music montage and a set piece at the midpoint. Basically what I'm saying is that Homer vs. Dignity would have turned out better if it were made 2 years later during the Al Jean era. I think it needed to be counterweighted with a more conventional approach. The aggressive and sarcastic bent of season 12 was not the ideal time to attempt this kind of story. Then again, would any other Simpson era have gone for this concept? Maybe this is a chicken and egg situation. There remains the question of whether Homer vs. Dignity is the worst episode ever. And personally, nah, I don't think it's that close. This is not a good episode of The Simpsons by any means, with how badly it fumbles its ending, and what an abomination the panda scene is. But there is enough strong material in it that I can have a good time watching some of it. Sure, Homer and Burns act like jackasses in this, but I at least understand their motivations, and it's somewhat true to who they are. It makes sense that Homer needs to roll around in the mud a little to properly explore this topic. It's not fun, but I get what they're going for. Whereas something like The Boy's a Bummer just makes me feel like Springfield is a bunch of assholes. And I confess, at least the panda makes me feel something. I can step back and laugh at how ridiculous this whole thing is, that the writers thought this was a good idea, and how mad it made everyone. I will take the idiotic spectacle of bad taste over character assassination any day of the week. At least this episode knows who the characters are. Homer vs. Dignity is more of a case of a decent episode fumbling the bag horribly. It's probably the most disappointing episode in series history. I mean, come on, we didn't even get the whole Malibu Stacy musical. What a ripoff. Of course, as always with these videos, that's just my personal take, so I'm curious where everyone else lands on Homer vs. Dignity. I'd imagine this one has a larger range of opinions because this is a how far is too far sort of argument. I bet there are many Simpsons fans who had no idea the panda scene was so infamous. So let me know what you think in the comments. Also, let me know if there's another hated Simpsons episode in particular you'd like to see me cover. We could go for the controversial, the character assassinations, or the just plain weird ideas. Hey, we could even hit up an episode from the current season. Let your voice be heard. As always, thanks for watching.